Well, welcome everybody. This is a quick note before I make any introductions that this webinar will be recorded and will be on our YouTube channel for future use, that you can go to our website and have a look if you missed something here. So my name is Ben Korchuk, and I'm of Carolinian Canada Coalition's Landowner Leader program. I'm an ecologist and a 24-year veteran of living in the rural landscape of Southern Ontario, and very excited to be hosting this fabulous webinar today. We have a great lineup of interesting people with fascinating stories and lots for you to learn and apply in your own lives. A note for the webinar speakers is that I've given you specific guidelines for the time that you have, and I won't be afraid to let you know when your time is ending or elapsed. The Carolinian Canada Coalition has been a leading eco-regional group in Canada since 1984. Stretching from Toronto to Windsor, the Carolinian Life Zone of southwestern Ontario is among North America's most vibrant and fragile ecoregions, featuring species such as cucumber magnolia, the Kentucky coffee tree, the yellow-breasted chat, and many others. The Coalition brings together diverse sectors, people and governments to collaboratively steward southwestern Ontario's unique habitat network by providing green infrastructure to support thriving wild communities and human communities in harmony for generations. A big challenge of this, of course, though, is that conserving and recovering rare species and habitats on public lands and in protected areas is extremely challenging in itself. Conserving these species and spaces on private lands adds a whole additional complexity that is completely dependent on stewardship, participation, and volunteerism. The goal of the Landowner Leader Program initiative is to inspire and guide private landowners to save, steward, and seed species at risk habitat in the Carolinian Life Zone, one of the most fragile and ecologically diverse landscapes in Canada. The program works closely with landowners and local conservation partners in southwestern Ontario through outreach, assistance, and recognition initiatives. Here to speak about this further is Bernie Salamander. Bernie is Carolinian Canada Coalition's Landowner Leader Coordinator. He's an ecologist and naturalist specializing in landowner stewardship, species at risk conservation, and ecotourism. He is also Executive Director of Nature's Calling Environmental Education and Nature Tour Director for Cuba Authentic Travel. Okay, Bernie, it's up to you.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I appreciate that, and welcome to our webinar participants tonight. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening. My presentation will take you through a program called the Landowner Leader Program, and I'd like to start that by showing you a map of Canada's far south, which is the area that is encompassed by the Carolinian Life Zone. It runs roughly from a line of Grand Bend right through to Markham, and everything south of that is considered to be everything below that is considered to be the Carolinian Canada Life Zone. It's a very special area because it is a confluence of more northern species typical of Ontario and more southern species that are found more typically and the Carolinian Life Zone covers about a quarter% of the total land mass of all of Canada, but yet it contains 25% of our human population, or about 7 million people. Very different from northern Ontario. This section of southern Ontario is 95% privately owned by landowners like yourselves and myself. Since the settlement of southern Ontario by Europeans, we have lost 94% of our upland forest, over 70% of our wetlands, and almost 100% of our prairies and savannas. Quite frankly, because they were the easiest to clear up for farming when settlers first came. On the other hand, Carolinian Canada still has 40% of Canada's plant species. All of the species are found throughout Canada. And we also have 77% of Canada's species at risk, which is over 150 species and counting at this time. This area is a very unique area in terms of its biodiversity, or diversity of animals and plants, and it's the highest in all of Canada. Carolinian Canada, our mission is to work on ecosystem recovery, and we do that through a number of different methods. It's through community action, through group action, youth, as well as landowners that we work with. This presentation will focus mainly on the landowner actions, but I do want to talk just briefly on conservation action plans, which are found in the community action circle there. Conservation action plans basically provide a roadmap outlining clear and strategic targets for protecting, restoring, and stewarding natural habitats. The Director of Ecosystem Recovery for Carolinian Canada, Jarmo Jalava, has been working the last 4 years in developing these conservation action plans with partners in the different areas that you see on the different circles here. Those partners include municipalities, provincial governments, conservation authorities, farm and woodland organizations, land trusts, naturalists, and many others. Carolinian Habitat is very diverse. Many of you that will have traveled throughout Southern Ontario will know that some of our habitats are also quite rare. We have not just woodlots, but also many riparian areas, cold water streams, of course Lake Erie, tallgrass, oak savanna, marshes, ponds, swamps, and other wetlands, and the coastal areas, which are quite significant with dunes and alvars and other ecosystems. Biodiversity certainly rules in Southern Ontario. The amazing array of habitats, ecosystems, and unique watersheds also provides home to many species of plants and animals, and again many species at risk that are found here. Specifically, a species at risk is any natural occurring plant or animal that's in danger of extinction or of disappearing from this province. And as I mentioned before, there are over 150 of those within the Carolinian Life Zone, and up to 500 others that may soon be at risk. Species at risk recovery, therefore, is a key component in protecting our biodiversity. And so we ask ourselves, is private property, of which we own more than 95% as private landowners, is it important to species at risk and habitat recovery? And the answer is very much so, because we do own that land, and we have that ability to be stewards of that land. For that reason, Carolinian Canada has developed a program called the Landowner Leader Program, and this was recently launched in December. I don't know if that comes up for everybody, but I keep getting a little screen coming up. Anyways, the logo that you see here is the logo that was developed to symbolize our program. The butterfly you see is a giant swallowtail, which is a rare butterfly in the Carolinian Life Zone and otherwise only found south of the border. The plant you see is called a hop tree, the leaves from a hop tree, and that is the host plant for the giant swallowtail caterpillar. The flowers are from the hop tree as well. The symbolism here is that the butterfly and the hop tree are intricately related. If you don't have the hop tree, you don't have the butterfly. And so that's the reason that we chose this particular logo. Part of the Landowner Leader Program has been to put on a series of workshops this winter, as well as the webinar that we're putting on tonight to make landowners more familiar with these, with the different habitats, with the species at risk, and what you can do to support those habitats. What we're developing is a Carolinian Habitat action plans for landowners. These habitat action plans look to save, steward, and seed our habitats in the Carolinian Life Zone. By saving, we're protecting habitat. By stewarding, we're improving that habitat. And by seeding, we're creating new habitat or habitat that used to exist, and we're bringing it back again. There's a lot of benefits to developing a conservation habitat action plan. First of all, it allows you as a landowner to set objectives and goals. It lets you learn about your property through assessment and inventorying, so familiarizing yourself with your own property. It helps you develop a budget and a timeline for your project that you're planning. And it helps in securing funds and technical support for your project. So in other words, by having all this information together, it's a lot easier to go and see if there are any funding opportunities available, and to go to various agencies like conservation authorities and stewardship councils for technical support. And of course, having that habitat action plan also provides the enjoyment and satisfaction in accomplishing your habitat goals on your land. There's a number of steps in developing a conservation habitat action plan that a landowner would have to go through. The first one of those is to actually identify your objectives. Secondly, to conduct a property inventory and a self-assessment. Thirdly, inventory plants and animals on your land. Fourth, do your research. And fifth, develop and implement your action plan. And I'll go through each of these steps briefly in the next few slides. Step one, identifying your objectives. As landowners, there's different reasons why we want to manage our land. It could be for environmental protection. It could be to do selective logging, or to produce maple syrup, or for shiitake mushroom production. It could be for an investment and a resale down the road. It could also be for recreation, such as hiking, trails, hunting. It could be for appreciating wildlife and other nature. In a habitat action plan, you develop specific objectives and goals. So you're not just saying, I want to plant some trees. You're going to set some realistic goals, as indicated here, for example, and that's by 2020, I'll increase the natural habitat for species at risk and other wildlife on my property by 10 hectares, which is 25% of my property. So that's a much more strategic and specific goal than just wanting to plant a few trees. Step two is conducting a property inventory. An inventory is the process of identifying, locating, and recording the physical and biological characteristics of your land that have the potential to support your objectives. The publication that you see in the lower right-hand corner, A Guide to Stewardship Planning for Natural Areas, was developed by the Ministry of Natural Resources for woodlot owners that have sufficient woodlot to be eligible for the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, which is a program that allows a reduction in taxes being paid on an annual basis. We have chosen to use this publication as part of our Carolinian Habitat Action Plan because it basically includes all the different aspects that we feel are important in developing a habitat action plan. And rather than reinventing the wheel, we felt this was a very appropriate publication to use. The other book that we highly recommend to landowners, and by the way, we do have copies of both these publications for any landowner that wishes to develop a habitat action plan, and I'll have more information in a follow-up email to you. But this publication here was developed by University of Guelph professor, and it is basically a guide to lead you through a property assessment and how your environmental performance on your own land is. To give you an example of the process, this is just one of the pages randomly taken from the book, but it allows you on various different topics to rate yourself as to what your performance is. And that rating system goes from 1, which is poor, to 4, which is best. You rate yourself on each one of these topics. If you rate yourself a 1 or a 2, then you can go to the back of the book, and there's a an area there where you can talk about, or where you can fill in an area and indicate what actions you might be able to take as a landowner to bring yourself up to a number 3 or a number 4. So this is a really useful publication as well to become more familiar with your land and with your environmental behaviors on your land. Step 3 is to do a plant and animal inventory, and quite frankly, this is the really fun part of doing a Carolinian Habitat action plan, because it takes you out on your land, it puts you face-to-face with the plants and animals that are out on your land. Our website will have many resources available to you in terms of what you can do, different monitoring and inventorying techniques. There are obviously lots of field guides available. There's websites. Local naturalists are a great source of information, and you can often get them to join you on your property and point out different plants and animals. There's also community monitoring programs available, like Feeder Watch, which is a winter bird watch program right from your window, and other things that help you become more familiar with the plants and animals and to hone your skills in identifying them. It's a great learning experience, and it can also be lots of fun. And you can do it at whatever pace you would like to do. Step 4 is research. The research component of this is to basically get more information on different habitat projects that you can do to learn more about species at risk and other wildlife. The website that you see here for the Ministry of Natural Resources takes you directly to a website that discusses species at risk. You can click on your particular county, and it will give you a list of species. Click on those species, and it will give you information and range maps on each one of these species as far as their biology, the type of habitat that they like, and so on. Conservation authorities are great sources of information as well, and they run on a watershed basis. We also have our conservation action plans that I described earlier on our website. Local naturalist clubs and land trusts, again, great source of information with some really keen amateur biologists and botanists. There's a number of local community programs and a lot of other sources of information that you can research. And finally, step 5 is to develop your action plan. Now that you've put your inventory, your research together, it's time to really refine your project goals, quantify those goals, review the information that you've collected, and then develop a timeline and budget for this. We actually have in draft form the Carolinian Habitat Action Plan manual, which is an easy manual that you can use to fill in and complete your action plan. The next steps after that, if you wish to work with Carolinian Canada, is to formalize a non-binding stewardship agreement. Each landowner will receive a Landowner Leaders sign with the attractive logo we've developed, as well as being able to pledge the action. And you can see on the bottom right-hand side it says, "I pledge this action." And we'll have a question later on coming up where you can actually pledge to take on the initiative of developing an action plan. And finally, of course, you're ready to implement your project. So that's been a very quick look. We normally do this throughout in a workshop over a 6-hour period, but I've given you kind of a very quick overview of the project. And we're going to hear from three of our landowner leaders that Ben will introduce, but I will leave you with the following quote from Aldo Leopold, who was one of North America's pioneer conservationists. Thanks, Ben. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bernie, and you actually have 45 seconds left, so that was really well timed, and you probably had the timer beside you there. I saw you had to battle through some of those technical glitches there too, but for the most part the slides were open and available, so thanks a lot, Bernie. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce our individual landowner leaders. And as Bernie mentioned, we had the great opportunity to see them at a few different workshops. And we're really just scratching the surface here because we only have so much time. So the introductions are very short for people who are really passionate, not just about their land, but where they came from in their lives to find themselves on a chunk of property and do some amazing things there. So first off, I'll introduce Kathryn Boothby, and her husband purchased a 51-acre property on the west edge of Norfolk County in 2005. They're retiring the previously farmed land and improving opportunities for wildlife in the existing woodlot and expanding existing woodlot and wetland habitats. Dave Ainsley is a farmer in East Essex County. He stewards a small woodlot located on the south end of his farm. Dave takes great pride in the abundant flora and fauna that have made his small property home. Native plantings and a snake hibernation site are two of his recent projects. And Stan Caveney and his wife Anita own Meadow Woods, a 108-acre undeveloped property in West Elgin. Their goal is to restore a continuous strip of riverine forest through the property and to increase forest interior habitat for lots of species that require that. Stan has recorded Jefferson, salamander, and yellow-breasted chat breeding on the property. So each of these landowners, these representatives, will have 10 minutes, and what we've asked them to prepare here is to describe their habitat projects, tell us why they undertook them, and how they went about implementing habitat actions, and if possible, make mention or allude to any species at risk that they've encountered on their properties. So I think we're going to start with Stan, is that right? Are you ready, Stan?
Kathryn, I think, was first.
Oh, sorry, it's Kathryn. Okay, let's go with Kathryn. All right, thanks, Kathryn.
Okay. Hi, thanks. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kathryn Boothby, and as mentioned, my husband and I own a 50-odd-acre property in the southwest corner of Norfolk County. We moved to the property about 7 years ago, and during that time we've had 7 years and created 7 different habitat projects. I'm going to talk to you about 3 of those today. And one of the most important things that I must stress to anybody who's undertaking projects on their land is to break it down into manageable projects, and which is why we've done 1 per year, because it stops it being overwhelming. So, click. The first project was watercourse protection and erosion control. Click. There was an immense amount of garbage in the ravine and stream when we first moved to our property, and the local farmer was tilling to within 2 feet of the ravine edge. You're getting a little ahead of me there with the slides, Bernie. Immense amount of garbage in the ravine and stream, and then tilling to within 2 feet of the ravine edge. So there was severe erosion in some of these places. The first action that we took was to remove 3.5 tons of household and farm refuse from the ravine. And as you can see, this garbage was pretty old. It had been there for decades. Old toilets, washing machines, tire, pesticide barrels, you name it. And there was over a ton of greenhouse glass that we actually had to move because the property was formerly a tobacco farm that grew their own seedlings. Next. So what we did was to plant a 12-foot prairie grass buffer around the ravine to help protect the water quality and the ravine edges from further erosion. The roots on these grasses go very deep, so they're very good in the sandy soil that we have to help stabilize the soil. And then we also installed some bluebird nesting boxes. Next, the results, as I say, were the flowering grasses help to attract butterflies all summer long, and they also offer cover to small animals. The roots help to stabilize the edges of the ravine, and they also filter runoff from the farm fields. The seed heads provide food for migrating birds during the fall, and the ravine and stream are also a haven to birds that bathe, feed, and play from January to December. So no matter what the season is, we get lots of bird activity here. Including some of the birds here. You'll see some rusty blackbirds, which are an unusual visitor to this area, black-billed cuckoo, pine siskin, and yellow warbler, just to name a few. And obviously we have the bluebirds now in the boxes that are raising their fledglings here. The second project, if we can go to the next slide, was all about protecting and expanding the existing woodlot. So the challenge here was that there was a municipal drain that was scheduled to go through the property that was part of the disclosures when we purchased the property. Now, the way that the drain had been specified, it would have drained all of the area that was currently swampy, and particularly it would have drained the woodlands, which have a lot of spring and fall ponds that attract wildlife. So the first thing we had to do there was to work with the county drainage people to re-specify the pipe so that it was closed and wouldn't drain that swampy bog. So it's very important to keep in touch with all the people who are having an effect on your land. The issue here is that the water table on the water from all of the surrounding lands runs down through our property and into our ravine. So the reason the drain had to go through was obviously to help keep the neighboring farmers' properties from flooding. So it was important to do that and to maintain good relations with our neighbors. We also wanted to increase the amount of woodland in a natural way and remove some of the marginal land from production. So we took 8 acres of marginal land out of production in this area. Next slide, please. And here we planted over 5,000 trees and shrubs. A number of varieties native to the area, including tulip tree, white pine, red and white oak, etc., all ones that are native to this area. The results of doing this in a carefully thought out way is that we managed to keep the spring and fall ponds in the woodlot, as well as the swampy habitat for all of the flora that grows in there. And we also had, next slide please, the natural growth of interim meadows that have encouraged ground nesting activity by wild turkey and mallard. And we've also brought species at risk, including meadowlark and bobolink, to these interim meadows. We've had the bobolink now for 4 years and the meadowlark for 2 years. And this year I actually found a white M butterfly, which is a rare occurrence in this area as well. So that, until the trees grow up, this meadow is creating a beautiful habitat, and as the trees do grow and fill in this area, we'll be moving grassland to other areas. Next slide, please. The next area we wanted to do here was to create a wildlife corridor from the back of the woods at the back of the property to the front of the property. There was a great expanse of farmland with nothing connecting in between to protect wildlife as they were coming from the back of the farm to the front and to the woods across the road from us. So what we needed to do here was to find a way to connect those habitats. So the first thing we did was to take off a 40 by 1,000 foot strip all the way down the property to create, number one, a buffer area along the road, but to also connect that wildlife corridor. So we also added a ½ acre of grassy paddocks south of the house to give some distance between us and the combine, because the combine was coming right up to our driveway. So we planted almost 100 native trees along here, including some species at risk, such as Kentucky coffee, and there's also some hop trees and cucumber. And we mow the area in a 3-foot swath. So all summer, all spring, summer, we let this grow naturally and create its own habitat. We didn't plant anything in here except the trees. And if you click to the next slide, you'll see that it has now become a very colorful and active place. During butterfly counts, we have more than 30 different species here. I work with the local naturalist group, and we do a butterfly count in the area. We have monarchs that lay their eggs on milkweed, and obviously caterpillars enjoy a tasty feast. Dragonflies help with insect control, And the birds enjoy this very abundant insect hunting ground. We even had a cattle egret drop by the paddock one fall afternoon. What is also good about creating something like this that is so visible is that it creates an opportunity for education. We've often had farmers that have stopped on the road as we've been walking around and asking us, why aren't you mowing your weeds? So it gives us an opportunity to talk about the importance of pollinators and why we're doing something like this. Some are supportive, others shake their heads at us and wonder what on earth we're thinking. But it has, as I say, it's created some wonderful results and a great deal of species at risk that come to the area. So I can give you a list of some of the species at risk that we have on the farm now that have been generated over the years. We have barn swallows, bobolink, and eastern meadowlark, as I mentioned. We have butternut trees, hop trees, cucumber tree, eastern flowering dogwood, and Kentucky coffee. We've had American badger passing through the property. Obviously lots of monarch butterflies, and reptiles include eastern hognose snake and gray rat snake, which are very happy to share the time in the woods and in my brush piles. And plants include green dragon and wood poppy. I'd like to take a few moments to thank a few of the people that have helped along the way, including Alice, Carolinian Canada, the Long Point Basin Land Trust, Long Point Region Conservation Authority, the M&R Stewardship Rangers, Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, the Otter Valley Naturalists, Norfolk County, and Norfolk Stewardship Council. And I encourage everyone to go and find as many people to talk to as possible to help them with their projects, because many minds make short work. Thank you very much for your time.
Great job, Kathryn. Thank you very much. And right on time. And Bernie, I guess you'll advance the next slide so we can have the next speaker move in. And my guest first to stand. And of course, it's Dave. Okay, Dave, take it away. Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me, Bernie?
I can,
okay.
Dave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to repeat, I'm a farmer, operate a 300-acre farm in Essex County, and I think a notable point is I'm about 15 kilometers due north of Point Pelee. How much of a physical, biological connection I have at the point, I'm not sure, but the main thrust of the farm is corn, wheat, soybeans, and the extra is I'm a beekeeper as well, and that came by accident. By accident also, the farm has a residual 25-acre Carolinian forest. Just by chance and the fact that the price of soybeans dropped in half in less than half a year, it was retained. Since then, I brought 10 acres out of agricultural production, and I'm looking at taking another 5 out of agricultural production and placing into a more natural landscape. Okay, I'm going to get at it from a practical point of view first, from a farmer's point. I've always been concerned in Essex County about the amount of organic matter, crop residue, we no-till farm, and the fertilizer that we add to the municipal ditch systems. So what I'm planning to do is to introduce over next 5 years, and I'm sort of playing with this from a design point of view, is putting in a combination sedimentation basins to capture soil particles and filtration traps composed of cattails, blue flag iris. I have a blue flag iris nursery now at one of the ponds, cardinal flower, arrowhead, pickleweed, and my goal is to, especially this year when I looked down the ditch and I saw it just filled with algae, and it told me that 2011 we contributed significant amounts of phosphorus into the drainage system, which does end up in the Great Lakes. So that is a priority project for me this year, and so the end goal is I filter all my surface field water through a filter basin. The next part is, next objective or project is to remove 4 acres of blow sand I just happen to be in a small part of Essex County where we have an outcropping of sand. I say when I'm at the barn at the 11th concession, I'm going up the hill, and it's an incline of about 4 feet. But what has happened in prior agricultural years is the blow sand and all its qualities disappeared into the wind. So what I'm in the process now of doing is turning it into a pollinator park. And this pollinator park will be, I've already started it with black cherry. Tulip trees have done tremendous up there. Hackberry, maple trees, basswood, sycamore, red oak, trying to get a variety of trees. And I should say that I've added last fall hop tree, as well as Kentucky coffee. But I like the hop tree because it fits in with my pollinator park. We do have good populations of swallowtail move through the farm every year, and it's nice to see on the farm. Also on the farm in this pollinator park, I've been bringing in both showy and Riddell's goldenrod, and plan to start propagating that to move around to other parts of the farm. We have milkweed, or butterfly and milkweed, and common milkweed. I'm a farmer who likes to see them, not eliminate them. I don't like to see them in the field too much, but I appreciate their appearance on my landscape. The next objective is, over time, since about 1985, I've been putting in linear tree lines on the farm, and they total about 5 kilometers as we speak. And they were singular tree lines with the specific purpose at that time is to control the wind. And so they had a limited purpose and a limited benefit. But slowly you start, even with the simple cedar spruce line, you start to see dragonflies, birds flying along the rows. And this also fits into my pollinator park for wind shelter. Because in Essex County, anybody who's gone through Kent and Essex and 401 recognizes the open landscape of this area and the dramatic effect that agricultural production has on this landscape. And so it's been a great way to minimize it. But now, partly because I'm a beekeeper, I've been drawn into the pollinator world. And so the goal now is, with these tree lines, to make them much more complex from a biological point of view. So we intend to plant lots of shrubs, trees. I did have deciduous tree lines only, so now I have to put in coniferous as a further and better windbreak during the winter season. But in between this, there'll be elderberry, the dogwoods, fragrant sumac, among others. I'm looking for habitat for both birds and bees. As a farmer, I also have to be cognizant of the fact that, am I creating problems for myself with increased deer population, raccoon population, and that has been a problem for me down in Essex County, where many deer herds are concentrated in a limited landscape which I'm trying to protect, and they seem to appreciate, but sometimes I wish they didn't like me that much. But the other thing also, too, I have to worry about when I put in all these tree lines and shrubs is that sometimes I'm approaching my field tile. And without field tile on the landscape here, I'm in trouble from an agronomic point of view. So it's a thin line that I follow here. But I'm working at it, and I've just got an idea about shoving copper tube up my plastic agricultural pipe so I can deter root growth. So that means I can do a total crosshair on this 300-acre farm. So my fields are surrounded by trees, shrubs, and I hope at the end of the 5 years they start to resemble a hedgerow, a much more complex biologic structure. Fourth objective I have is to restore a Carolinian forest logged heavily by my grandfather in the late 20s, but the fortunate part was the price of wheat went down to 6 cents a bushel, and so they just forgot it and left it. Consequently, the understory was left intact, and so now I have acres of trillium, wildleaf, spring beauty. I have species at risk, shoe-marred oak, climbing prairie rose, and a good eastern fox snake population. I've started to collect an inventory with the help of my naturalist friends from Windsor, and they've been, from a farmer's point of view, they've been a great assistance in helping me understand the complexity of my woodlot in much greater detail. And I think I love the fact that I find it embracing, and it's all encompassing to be able to understand the formation of our lands over a period of 10,000 years. So that I'm grateful for the field naturalists of Essex County and the Canada South Land Trust. So in the end, I can say, yes, there are 4 objectives there, but what I want to do is to create a farm I don't want to leave. I want to be there. And I'll leave it at that for now, Bernie, and I hope that covers it a little bit.
Hi, David. This is Ben. That was really great. Your passion certainly comes through, and again, once it was perfectly on time. So now I know for sure, and thanks once again, David, that Stan is up, and Stan's going to talk about Elgin County now.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. I'd like to start by thanking everyone in Carolinian Canada, Ben and Bernie, for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Anita and I bought a piece of land in West Elgin in 2004, and we're both keen naturalists, and one of the reasons we bought the land is that we were deeply concerned about the loss of natural habitat in the Carolinian zone. The other reason was that my wife wanted to get me out the kitchen. But it's been a wonderful experience, and we very soon learned, as Bernie pointed out earlier on, that there's some good information, good literature out there, and I read the M&R's publication, The Guide to Stewardship Planning, from cover to cover, and we registered in the MIFTID program, the program for which that booklet is designed, which is a Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, in 2008. And because of that, I'd actually done a lot of the groundwork for the Carolinian Habitat Action Plan program that Bernie and Ben are promoting. The land we own, 105 acres actually, is on the Bothwell Sand Plain, which is essentially a clay with a thin sheet of sand over the top. What that means is that the water table is very high, and historically the land probably was mostly swamp forest and tableland forest. The area you see in this picture was originally abandoned, or if you like, retired farmland, and we scraped away, with the help of the Elgin Stewardship Council and Ducks Unlimited, we scraped away 2 to 3 feet of soil. That's the deepest point on this wetland, and it was quite remarkable how the seeds associated with wetland suddenly appeared, and the vegetation grew to be the sort of vegetation you might expect a wildlife pond to have in its mature state, and this is within a couple of years of the pond being constructed. I should point out that in the long run, this pond will become swamp forest, and this will be a swale, a wet swale inside a forest. I don't know if Ducks Unlimited wanted to go that way, but give it 100 years, and that's what it'll be, provided succession progresses in the direction we'd like. Next slide, please. The first thing we did as part of the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program, that's going backwards, I think, was to design a analysis of the land. What you're looking at here is an air photograph of our property, and each of the colors represent different compartments on the property, or if you like, vegetation communities. The 3 down the bottom left are all forest communities, which are all Carolinian. They're fairly mature. Forest compartment 1 and 2 down the bottom left are actually fairly mature forest blocks. 1 is tableland, 2 is actually the slope forest associated with the creek, and F3 down the bottom is actually a secondary growth. It's only about 40 years old, so the trees are still quite young. But they're all Carolinian forest compartments, and they're basically the back 40 that the farm would have had in the early days. The other compartments on there include a former pasture, which is the brown-colored compartment F5, which was totally denuded by sheep and cattle that grazed the land from the 1800s. And in the last 30, 40 years before our time, that compartment had began to recover because mixed farming had ceased and there was no more cattle on the land. And the previous owner of the property, who was a gentleman from Windsor, had planted some pine on the property, and I don't know if you can see all the little green dots in the various compartments, but that's basically a nursery crop of scattered pine into which all the native Carolinian species are busy reseeding. So we have a lot of natural regeneration going on, as well as a lot of work we are currently doing ourselves, because I'm pretty much an hands-on guy, and we're doing a lot of planting ourselves. The pond on the first slide I showed you is the blue feature to the lower right-hand side at 3 o'clock on the diagram. So that's what the property looks like from the air. It's got a nice block of Carolinian forest. It's got about 1 kilometer of riparian stream bank vegetation. It's got some temporary wetlands in the forest, what are known as vernal pools or ponds, and it's got some permanent ponds which are shown in various places. And what's happening now to the old cropland is going through various stages of thicket, and eventually will become, in this case, because of the pine plantation, become a mixed forest of conifers and deciduous plants. But we're talking long time after I've shot off my mortal coils. So that's what the property looks like. Now we have various projects going. Most of them involve planting, but some of them involve digging. But the planting projects are essentially to restore the swamp forest conditions where possible. And we've been doing this for the last 6 or so years, been planting every spring, planting trees, native trees to the area, many of them native trees which are comfortable in wet soils. And I can just mention a couple of trees we planted a few specimens of, like black gum and sycamore tree, both of which like their feet wet. And they're the sort of trees we find locally in the remnant pieces of Carolinian forest in West Elgin. We're also planting deciduous trees along the creek where there are gaps in the forest cover to improve the riparian habitat. The stream bank erosion is severe because of upstream systematic tiling. We have both stream bank erosion and scouring of the creek bed as a result of the flashiness of the creeks, and we're trying to do everything we can to reduce that on our land. So we're planting trees along the streams. We're planting trees along the edges of the forest because that's where most of the trees survive best. They seem to be sheltered better from the winds when they're up against the edge of the forest. They get more shaded, and they just seem to do better that way. I've gone away from planting trees in the middle of an open area because the tree is really stressed by desiccation and other adverse influences. We have quite a few species at risk on the property. I'll just mention a few of them. Next slide, please, Bertie. Just a few of them. We have yellow-breasted chat, which is a rare breeding warbler in this area. Next slide, please. Thank you. And we have the Jefferson salamander, which is both these species are extremely rare and are listed in the species at risk brochures up a bit as S1 species, which means that they're threatened, if not endangered, in southwestern Ontario. We have habitat for one of these species because the thicket areas, which are the old fields, are going through this transitional thicket stage until they become young forest. So the yellow-breasted chat, at least for now, is reasonably safe. But in time, it may find that we don't have any habitat left for it because it's extremely difficult to manage land and hold it back in one particular successional stage. And ultimately, we want to go to forest. The salamander is an interesting story because the Jefferson salamander is extremely rare in our area, and yet it was obviously quite happily living in one of our little ponds in the shallow ponds in our forest. And what we hope to do is to improve the terrain of the forest where possible to improve habitat for salamanders. They are one of the most endangered group of animals that we have. We're also managing the forest for rare species of tree. We have both eastern flowering dogwood and butternut, both mature specimens of these two trees in our woods. The eastern flowering dogwood is probably 100 years old, and the butternut are probably 50 years or older. Both these trees are threatened by fungal diseases, fungal pathogens, and both are subject to shading. They are much happier when the crowns are in the full sun or they're growing along the edges of bush in a more exposed spot. And our plan is to get permission from the various authorities, because these trees are both regulated, what can be done around them, get permission from the authorities to improve the habitat around these trees to at least attempt to increase their resistance to the fungal diseases which are knocking many of them out. Next slide. Oh, this is the last slide. Thank you. So that's what we're doing. We're having a lot of fun, and it's been remarkably rewarding from an emotional perspective. And I think David and Kathryn will agree that it really is the right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stan. That's always great to hear. I've heard it a few times now, and I've picked up something new. And really like how you look with a mustache there. That must have been just after November or something. So what we're going to do now, just before the period where we have about 15 minutes where you can ask the panelists some questions that you might have on the presentations, is that we're going to release a question here that's a poll that would be really great if you look over on to the right where you see polls. I am opening a poll right now, and the question should appear. Can any of the organizers see this now?
Yeah.
Has it been released? Okay, great. So take a couple minutes now, if you could, on this, answering the question. Okay, so like I said, we have a number of minutes now where you can go through and submit some of your questions. Also look to the right on the panel there, and you'll see a drop-down box that says question. We have had a couple of questions submitted ahead of time. So one of the ones that we could pose to any of the panelists is the question about attracting wood ducks. How do you attract them? And so what kinds of habitats, what kind of special features? Does anyone feel like taking that on, especially our three panelists here?
Shoot.
Does anyone have success with wood ducks on their properties through these restoration projects?
Yeah, we have wood ducks on our pond. They are nesting in boxes we installed. We haven't had a successful brood out of the one nest box, but we do have wood ducks and their chicks on our ponds every year. So they are nesting in the area and using our ponds as escape areas during the daytime for the chicks.
Okay, and so
sorry.
Go ahead, Kathryn. Go ahead.
Kathryn, yeah, in our area, because our woodland is usually a spring and fall ponds, last year it was a very dry year, so while wood ducks came to the woods, they didn't stay because the ponds were too shallow. We have installed wood duck boxes as well, so we have a hope of bringing them this year, unless, of course, the owls get to the wood duck boxes first.
And how high are your boxes that you're putting them up there, both Stan and Kathryn?
Mine are between 4 and 5 feet. So
yeah, mine are about the same. The wood boxes are at the deepest part of the pond, so they're 4 foot into the mud, and then there's another 4 feet of pole above the water level.
Mine are actually attached to trees that have their feet in the actual spring ponds when there's water there, so they're actually attached. And to start off, I put some shavings in the boxes to encourage them to come in, because like many birds, they like to think that other birds have said, "Ooh, this is a good place before them." So that philosophy works very well with purple martins as well.
Well, where I'm living currently is a very urban area of London in Old South, and we have so many mature trees here, and we have some wood ducks nesting in this area that are 50 feet up. They all jump out of the tree, in late, in May, and they walk across Warncliffe Road over to the coves. So, if you have that habitat, it doesn't necessarily mean you need a pristine site, because they will walk great distances and sometimes across 4-lane highways. I did notice that David Ainsley, your property is quite near the Comber Woods, which, because there's so little habitat between you and Point Pelee National Park, it's a well-known area for warblers after they head north from Point Pelee in the spring. Do you have any wood ducks or any birds that nest like that?
Ben, by nature, I'm not a bird watcher, but I don't know if you saw that slide with the pond and the bird tower.
Yes.
I necessarily don't aim to provide, I do indirectly provide habitat for birds. What I did do with that tree tower is provide habitat for bird watchers so that they might come out to the farm and I might learn something from them. But
great.
yeah, well, that's the only way I learn is from, or one of the best ways is from other people. And eventually that tower will be totally surrounded by trees, and so then it will be living in the canopy. And I hope to then pick up my interest and knowledge of birds. I think as a farmer's life, boy, it seems like you're on the move so much that time to stop and stare seems to be rare moments. So, I'm looking to the future.
Okay. Well, we actually are getting quite a few questions coming in now. So we've got about 10 minutes for the question period, and since we shaved off a couple of minutes, we might be able to do that. Okay, so I'm closing that poll now, by the way, just in case you didn't get a chance to look at that, because we will be opening up another poll in a minute. So the next question, if we could have one person in particular answer this, was about frogs. What kind of frogs live in the forest and how do they overwinter? Has anyone had experience with that on any of these private property projects?
Okay, Ben? Dave here.
Yes, it's David.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a good population of green frogs in the deep water pond, and the farm has, because of my sedimentation basins scattered around the farm, I have a good population of leopard frogs, American toad, chorus frogs. So I do have in the spring, yes, the woods are alive with the sounds of frogs.
That's great. And from what I've seen before, those bigger frogs will hibernate most often lower in the pond in the mud, but things like wood frogs will be in the leaf litter itself, and of course they're highly adapted to that, where they can freeze up to half of their body. So some really interesting things to learn about those frogs in the forest setting. Even if you don't have a big wetland, they can often overwinter just in the leaf litter.
Absolutely. And also,
Any other comments?
Don't forget the toads, of course. There's lots of American toads that also hang around, and they're great for eating up all those little bugs.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly frogs will colonize a new wetland. The first year after we put a small pond in the other end of the property, there was an absolute orgy of toads around that pond. And over the years, the population of frogs has shifted. Where once it was a toad heaven, it's now colonized by both leopard and green frogs, and some toads. But the population changes. But you don't need much water to get a colony of frogs happy in the little vernal pools in the woods. I mean, for chorus frogs and spring peepers, it's perfect habitat. Very satisfying.
That's great. That's really great. And there are a couple more questions, and I want to get to those pretty quickly because they're coming in now in good numbers. So once we have formulated our plan, what is the next step? Do we submit it somewhere? So this might even be a question perhaps for Bernie. This is from Carolyn.
Yeah,
Bernie, are you on?
Yes, I'm back. We're still working out the procedure, but the concept is that in order to develop a Carolinian Habitat Action Plan, you would go to the Carolinian Canada website and you can get in contact with myself. We would have some preliminary discussions on your project. You would work through the Carolinian Habitat Action program, and at the end of that, the concept is that we will have a peer review committee. So this would be a small committee of landowners like yourself that would have a look at your Habitat Action Plan and maybe suggest any changes or say, yeah, this looks great. From there on, we would provide you any support in getting you in touch with local conservation authorities, with local funding programs if available. And in order to become a landowner leader, then you complete your habitat action plan, you receive a sign, you sign the non-binding stewardship agreement with us, and then we may even have you on our website as one of our landowner leaders and a focus on that. But anyway, so that I'll be sending out an email to all participants as well with further details on how you go about doing that.
Great, thanks, Bernie. And the next two questions, was there another comment? Or? Okay. The next two questions are very similar, so I'll read them together. Where does everyone get their wild seed from for their meadows? And I have a few acres that is scrub grass area and was wondering where I can purchase seeds to plant in order to turn the grass into more of a prairie grass area. So two really good questions, and often it's been something that's been holding a lot of people back because they want to do the right thing, and a lot of the mainstream nurseries don't have this anymore. So who wants to mention where they get their seeds from, or make reference to a certain location on the Carolinian website?
This is Kathryn. There are a couple of places that I have obtained seed. One is from Acre Restoration, which is near Walsingham, and the St. William's Forestry Center. That is another place, Walsingham, St. William's. And as for those both local areas with native seeds, also for tree stock, I go to Vanden Nest Nurseries that are in Eden, which is in Elgin, and they are a very good source for native trees and shrubs, varying sizes.
Thanks, Kathryn. And I'd just like to mention another nursery that's been very reliable for me, Nith River Native Plants, kind of northwest of Waterloo, has been a good source for native plants and not so much huge quantity of seeds, but certainly for small areas.
Ben, I'll also mention that there's an organization in Ontario, the Society for Ecological Restoration, has a chapter here in Ontario, and they actually have a publication called the Native Plant Resource Guide Ontario. That publication is available, I think, for $6 at www.serontario.org, and it lists pretty much every native plant nursery in Ontario, as well as some very interesting articles on things like applying ecological restoration guidelines, floral species at risk, and other information as well. As far as establishing tallgrass prairie, there's also a number of organizations in Ontario that can help. We do have those on our website. Probably the most well-known is the Rural Lambton Stewardship Network. They are very experienced in terms of establishing tallgrass prairie in southern Ontario.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. And that first publication, did that used to be called Get the Seed Out?
I don't think so. I think that's another publication yet that's out of print.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, great. Yeah, definitely some sources there. And this next question is shared by a lot of people who get a little bit of experience on the land. Is there a natural way to get rid of Phragmites from around my pond, which is the giant reed grass, which conservation authorities, the government, private landowners all battle this grass that's very invasive and grows quickly and grows underground. So I know we've had discussion a few times in the last few gatherings. So who's going to take on that one?
Ben, Dave talking.
Okay, great, Dave.
Farm, because we're surrounded by it, is I keep an eye out for it every year along the ditches in wet areas, and I hit it with Roundup pretty quickly as soon as I can. I never let it get into a large growth pattern. Hit it quickly. I know that's not much help for people with already well-established patches. My take on my farm is get it quickly. Don't sit on it.
Okay.
Kathryn
okay,
here.
and as far as...
okay. Kathryn here.
Go ahead, Kathryn.
The issue with the Phragmites is it spreads under the ground through roots. So you can try digging it up, but invariably you'll leave a small piece behind, and that small piece can grow into a big patch very quickly. So while it's honorable, and something I always wanted to do is try and dig it out versus using the heavy artillery, it is practically impossible to get rid of it without the heavy artillery.
I think for Ben, for smaller areas where it's just establishing, I think that's the easiest way to get it. And this time of year, you should be going out there and removing all of the seed heads, disposing of them by either burning or putting them out to your garbage or burying them, and then going back in August. And particularly because it's near water, you don't want to be spraying the Roundup with a backpack sprayer. So what you do is you take a brush, take the Roundup, water it down to about 1 to 10 parts, and use the brush to actually brush the young emerging Phragmites, and then you'll have to repeat that for 2 or 3 years. For larger areas, there are other techniques that are being developed, but it's a lot more complex.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. And Mark, I know you had mentioned that you wanted a natural way, and aside from digging and digging and digging, getting every last piece, it seems like quite a challenge. And I think there's some feedback coming in here, so if some of the organizers could just mute themselves for a moment. Okay, let's have a mute just for a moment. See if that helps. Okay, great. So I don't know if you heard me there, Mark. I know your question was indicating a natural way, and for the most part, unless it's really small, it's pretty much impossible to do it in a natural way. So take care, everybody, and make sure that you see this stuff as soon as possible, because for most people that speak about this say if you've got it, you're just going to basically manage the extent of it and not ever get rid of it, unless your habitat completely changes and you have old-growth forests for a couple of 100 years and it's completely shaded out. But then again, you'll have some trick that most of us haven't learned yet, how to live a couple 100 years. Okay, so we are going to now, I don't see any more questions posted there. Did I miss any? Do any of the organizers see any that have come up? I think that's pretty much it. Okay, oh sorry, there was one. Can you provide contact for sign up for prescribed burning courses, please? I did miss one. Does anyone have any direct contacts for a prescribed burning course, either through a conservation authority or through the Ministry of Natural Resources?
Or through perhaps through checking with the local fire department. They may be able to help you.
I think
that's a good point, actually. We go ahead, Bernie.
I think Ministry of Natural Resources is the best source. If you go to the M&R website, you can find the page that they have there, and there are courses and sign-ups provided there. If you're going to have prescribed burns done, you can contract people as well. That's normally the way landowners go about it. There's a few that will do their own, but for the most part, professionals are brought in, especially for larger areas.
Kathryn here too. You do need to have a burn permit before you put match to ground, though.
Yes, you do need a burn permit, and in some cases, some of these groups will actually ask you to help, which it's usually a smaller role that you play with a water pack on your back, but it's kind of fun and it is very effective. So I'm glad that someone amongst the group here is very interested in that, because the grasslands have been so eliminated across the province. Okay, so I'm going to launch the second poll now. I don't see any more questions. So if you can take a couple of minutes now, it shouldn't take long. It's just yes or no, and it's completely confidential. This will really help us out for planning future events and further designing and improving this landowner leader initiative. Any other comments while people are filling in this poll? Everybody's concentrating.
Well, It's Kathryn here. I just want to say, one of the things for creating wildlife habitat is the joy that you get year over year. Even when you first create a piece of habitat, it looks a little bit sparse and barren. But, first year you'll get a little, foliage coming, the second year more, and each year you get more and more critters coming to your area, whether it is frogs and toads, mice and voles, dragonflies, butterflies, or birds. And it's just such an experience every season as the seasons progress and the years go along to see the beauty and the variety and diversity that you get just from making small changes on your property.
And Kathryn, I just want to add as well that, we haven't focused on species at risk a lot during this webinar, but there's nothing more exciting than actually seeing one of these species at risk on your property or having a species at risk plant on your property. And I know there are regulations in place. I know landowners like farmers and woodlot owners are sometimes leery about that legislation, but having worked with those types of folks, I've seen farmers that were absolutely thrilled to know and see a badger digging on their property, or the first time that they have seen, flowering dogwoods on their property for many years, new seedlings that have taken root. So I agree, it's just an exciting thing.
Bernie,
yes,
I just wanted to comment. I want to congratulate Carolinian Canada for placing in the public's eye, and also placing a value on retention and restoring of the Carolinian forest. Once you're immersed in it, you're just in another world, and sometimes I do think that if you can get into that other world, it takes the human character into another one too, and I think it's one much more pleasant than the everyday busyness. So Carolinian Canada, I think, has done a great job in recognizing the value it has, not only from an ecological sense, but also from a social sense.
Thanks very much, David. And really, it's folks like yourself and Stan and Kathryn that that allow us to accomplish our mission of ecological restoration and bringing back some of these habitats and the species that live there.
Yeah, I fully agree. And since we wanted to keep this to a little bit over an hour and 15, I noticed that one more question did kind of sneak in there. If we could just ask this quickly before we thank everybody. How can I stop soil erosion caused by my creek flooding and washing the soil away under large trees? That was Peter who asked that. Does anyone have insight on that question?
Stan here. I've noticed a tremendous increase in the erosion along my stream banks, largely because the township has improved the road drainage into the creeks, and most farmers upstream have now adopted systematic tillage practices. So when it does rain, the water comes down at a much greater velocity and a pulse. And I would say it's almost inevitable you're going to lose those trees because the stream is basically developing a new course. And I've got a lot of trees which are just hanging by the bare roots, and they're going to go right across the creek soon enough, and there's not a heck of a lot you can do about it. You could try and slow the flow down, but that would involve quite severe re-engineering of the upstream creek, creating meanders and things like that. I think it's a very difficult problem, and I don't think it's going to go away very soon. Sorry to be this.
Well, that's really well answered, Stan, and he gives the longer version in the workshop. And just adding the point that it's really important natural feature of changing habitats and creating new ones. Well, I know you're probably concerned about the individual trees.
Can I make
thanks
a
for
comment?
That question.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah,
David?
From a farmer's point of view, yes? I just say yes.
Oh, I was just going to make...
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
It's just intensifying that need to get the water off the land, and some of it's related to the intensity of storms we get. If the crop is to survive, it becomes necessary to get the water off as quickly as we can, which means you're picking up the energy of the stream, the water going downstream. I would like to think that sooner or at some point in time we could come together and put buffers in there, whether they're retention ponds for agricultural land. It's something to look for and aim for down the road, because I just see the tiling, the degree of it picking up, the immediate takeoff of water from the land on the top, all adding to the energy into that municipal drainage system. It's something to work toward.
Right. One person, it's Kathryn here, one person you also might want to talk to who deals with this and on their own properties is Paul Gagnon. He is the water supervisor with the Long Point Region Conservation Authority, and in his work he deals with this type of thing fairly frequently. So he'd be worth giving a call and having a chat with about your challenge.
Thanks very much for that insight. And I just would make notice that we have that second poll still open, and it looks like 81% of the people have voted. And the way I see it here, it's blue and red. It almost looks like an American election here, the way the numbers are stacking up. So I'm closing that poll now, assuming everyone's had a chance to vote. All right, so we had a really great time. It was our first webinar, and we decided to do this as a way to reach out for people who couldn't make it to the workshops. And it's also a requirement of some of the funding that we've received. So we're really thankful for everybody who saw the various notices and joined on this and maybe told other people about it. That's really important for us. And we have a number of people who are behind the scenes and helping us set this up. And we're really thankful for them, because the technical side of this is a little more complicated than what it looks like. So I'd again like to thank Kathryn, David, and Stan, and of course Bernie. And any closing thoughts, Bernie?
I think you've said it all, Ben. I just want to maybe just thank thank the folks that have come on, and certainly hope to hear from you in the future as possible landowner leaders.
Everybody, and contact us through the website, or through the emails, or of course old-fashioned phone calls. And keep in touch. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Good night.